you're trying to elicit emotion from someone or express your own, that sort of thing. That makes everything more powerful. Even if there's just two characters and in the scene and you're trying to find ways to connect them and you just like try to find an emotion, a mood, and then how can these characters interact with each other to portray this mood? Maybe it's tension, maybe it's sadness, whatever it is. I think it's important to kind of get into that headspace and uh, just feel a variety of emotions and don't be afraid of that, because that's what makes your work better.
Please welcome concept artist Amy Cornelson for this episode of the podcast. Amy creates some stunning concept art with a speciality in characters and creature design, and since graduating has worked for the likes of ILM, Inflexion Games and more. Amy is also a Learn Squared student and a few years back took our Concepting in ZBrush course taught by Alex Virginia. So we wanted to check in and see what her journey has been like since then, and what it was like making the jump from student to professional artist, and of course, what inspires her vivid designs. Let's go. Okay, let's go. Everyone, welcome back to the Learn Squared podcast, and I'm delighted to welcome on today's guest, Amy Cornelson. Welcome,
Hi.
Amy.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for jumping on. I'm I'm excited to chat to you today, and I'm looking forward to it as well. For many reasons, one of them because you're an amazing artist. I really like the work that you have, and it'd be cool to do a deep dive into what inspires you and how you make your creations. And people who are listening along, hit the links so you can see Amy's work as we're going along as well. But before we get into that, please let everybody know who you are.
Okay, I'm Amy Cornelson. I'm a concept artist. I'm currently working at Industrial Light and Magic. And I love characters and creatures. I think you can see in my portfolio that's just a huge passion. But I like doing everything else as well. Concepting, whether it's environments, props, characters, creatures, it's just an adventure. It's a problem-solving adventure, and it's really fun.
Cool. How long have you been doing that now? I guess because concept art is not something that maybe it is nowadays where people I want to be a concept artist. A lot of the time it was I want to do this thing, and then found out the label is concept art. What was the story like for you?
Yeah, so I grew up always drawing. When I was a kid, I liked to draw horses a lot. And then when I was, I think, 13 or 14, my parents got my sister and I the Lord of the Rings extended edition box set. And we watched that. And I watched I think Alan Lee and John Howe drawing and doing concept art. And I'm like, wait a second, you can draw for movies. And then it kind of opened up the doorway. You can draw for video games and kind of you can create stuff for media. And that just kind of opened up a whole new door for me. Seeing those two guys just creating, and the whole team creating this whole film, the behind the scenes. It was exciting. It was exciting to see.
So would you say it was, which I still claim is the greatest film potentially ever made, not just Lord of the Rings, the extended edition, especially the appendices, all the behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Was that the kind of the aha moment where this is what I want to do?
Yeah, it definitely was. I remember every year I'd rewatch them and all the extended editions behind the scenes, and I just sit there drawing and sketching while I was watching the behind the scenes because it was so inspiring.
Oh, totally. Inspiring and also super educational, like you mentioned. Yeah. I remember watching it too, and firstly it was about, hey, let's get some extended scenes, because that was even though I remember bursting to go to the toilet whilst watching it in the cinemas, I was happy to watch 4 hours of each film, more and more. And then usually I remember back in the day of DVDs, that's when we had them, when it was not Blu-ray or DVD. And usually extended stuff or a special edition stuff was more just extended scenes, some poorly cut together behind the scene anecdotes, and that was it. This was a proper, you could even call it a course in how to make a film, almost from everything from scripting, from Foley art to the concept art to the props. It was just amazing. A great resource, almost like an encyclopedia for film.
Yeah.
And for me as well, it was a case of like, before that, it was drawing, doing things that I thought were cool. And that was like, ooh, this is how it's done. And yeah, when I found out that, it was okay, the film was great, but how it was made was, for me, where the true magic was at. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
have you seen the Hobbit extended editions?
I have seen the Hobbit. I have those as well.
Cool. What did you think about those? I know the film's much maligned. I don't mind it too much, but it was still the same kind of thing where a lot of the behind the scenes and how they made it. It was quite interesting to see the jump in how it was made, right?
Yeah, it was really interesting to see the differences, I guess, from like the late 90s, early 2000s to making The Hobbit, and how the sets would have changed, kind of how digital is making its way in, and that sort of thing. It was cool to see the changes, and I really appreciated that they had like kind of like a documentary of sorts, the same as they did with the original trilogy.
Definitely. And even like you mentioned, Alan and John, it was cool to see them in the Hobbit one, like picking up. This is not my Wacom stylus, but Wacom stylus and doing it some digitally as
Yeah.
opposed to like their, which still was cool, their pencils and paper, which is still telling that. Even I was watching it interestingly again yesterday, trying to get my daughter on it, and just seeing like how it holds up, and then thinking back to like how this was constructed and made, and we're blessed with all the tools that we have available today. But
Yeah.
those two in particular, it was basically built off their imaginings of Middle Earth and the writings of Tolkien, that was done almost in a traditional way. And that is still like so cool to see, especially with all the stuff happening now with tools and things that are making art so-called easier and maybe not easier. Um, but what was your journey like from that point then? So you've seen Lord of the Rings, you've seen how potentially someone could do this as a job. How did you make that happen from there? Was it like kind of like a constant thing where like, okay, I have to get this done now, or was it still trying to figure things out and that was kind of like swimming in the background?
I think so I watched them early teens, and throughout my teens I just continued to draw. I knew I wanted to do art for a living, and I know that wasn't like uh you know some folks don't think art you can make a living off of it, and I was determined to prove some of them wrong, I suppose. So it was just a passion of mine. So in my final graduation year at high school, I built a portfolio to get into the Alberta College of Art and Design in Calgary. I think it's called the Alberta University of the Arts now. So when I got in there, I took a 4 years bachelor degree in design, specialized in character design, and then shortly after, I got a job at a small indie studio called Beamdog in Edmonton.
Cool. And what was that journey like? Did you find school, particularly like the educational side of things, easy, or did it come naturally to you, or did you find it quite challenging?
I think it was challenging. Yeah, just when you're kind of drawing just on your own little bubble, when you're a teenager, then you get thrust into this community where your work's maybe being picked apart. You're
Hmm.
learning. It's a growing experience, and I know growing experiences aren't always easy, but this one was definitely worth it. Just kind of learning the ins and outs of how to get good critique, how to improve, and not feel attacked if someone
Yeah.
offers feedback. I think that was a
Yeah,
big part of school for me.
that is very interesting that you mentioned that. Like, just looking back at some of my stuff back at school as well, it was like you mentioned feedback there. I think the first time I actually felt that I understood that you shouldn't take feedback personally was quite later on in terms of like university. I remember through like school and high school and all that kind of stuff. It's more just like technical advice,
Yeah.
like you should use this kind of tone, that kind of shading, etc., etc. When it was kind of like felt more personal, like, hey, this design isn't really good, or you should do this or that and the other. It was kind of like a kick in the gut, so to speak, and then you kind of learn that, oh no, this is the way things are. And you, I guess, if it was, and I've done jobs where they weren't creative, when you get similar kind of feedback, it's like, okay, cool, let's figure it out. But when it's art, it's very personal, and you kind of do take it to heart. At least I did. Like, what was that kind of experience for you? Like, is that something that kind of like maybe made you question what you were doing, or was it something that kind of like made you feel like, okay, no, I'm gonna double down and I'm gonna make sure that kind of doesn't happen again, so to speak?
Yeah, the second one definitely. I like learn to love feedback. You learn through school that it's not people hating your work; it's people
Yeah.
trying to help you make your work better. Um, so I think for me, I like the challenge of like you get these puzzle pieces and you're trying to figure out the best solution. These feedback, all these puzzles, and for me, it's just like a problem solving sort of
Hmm.
game almost. It's
Hmm.
it's hard to describe, but I like the challenge, and I'm the kind of person, once I hear the feedback, I want to implement it. I want to get it right.
Hmm.
I want to do the best I can.
And I think feedback's a very good topic as well. Like you mentioned, that like trying to implement it. It's almost like getting a new piece of the puzzle you're trying to solve as well.
Yeah.
What kind of things did you pick up on that were like, I guess, great, not tricks, but like tips to maybe think, okay, this is how I'm going to implement feedback? Like, is it something that's pretty abstract, or do you have like a kind of formula of how to implement feedback, if that question makes sense?
Yeah, I guess it depends. Like for if it's a lot of feedback, I'll usually try to organize it within like kind of like a structure, I guess. A lot of the time, actually, through work, the feedback is kind of given to me like that already. So
Hmm.
it's kind of just for me to plan how to implement it in a good timeline. Usually, I'll start with the most difficult feedback first, or the one that will upset the design the most. You're working from the big shapes into like the smaller ones, I think.
Hmm.
So I think it's good to get the big feedback out of the way first.
Cool. And that kind of like strategy, is that something that you've developed, or is that part of your nature, would you say? Like, do you tend to apply that in almost everything in life? Because I found that a lot of the things that we do as artists tends to come from our nature, so to speak.
Yeah, I'd say definitely if there's like a problem or something on my end, or a house thing, or maybe the dog has an ear infection, I'm like, I got to get on that right now,
Yes.
So it's, it's yeah, it's interesting.
Cool. At school, what were the kind of like teaching you? Was it quite a generalist thing, or like was it very specific, or did you get to choose what you wanted to specialize in?
So for the first year, it was mostly kind of, I think, kind of getting used to everything. So what they would do is I would take the design courses that I needed to get to my second year of design, but we also got to choose electives to just kind of explore different media. And then as we went along, you kind of specialized more and more into what you wanted to do. I found that my instructors were always very open of letting me kind of uh, tailor the project to what I thought my portfolio needed,
Hmm.
so which was really great. We always got some like kind of a loose a project, but I really wanted to focus on video game concept art or movie concept art, creatures and characters. So I was always trying to
Cool.
tailor it towards that a bit more, instead of maybe something more illustrative or I'm trying to think here. Yeah, just try to tailor it more into something that I wanted to do, which
Hmm.
was really nice that they were able to have that freedom, because everybody kind of had um, their own goals, and it was cool to see this one project, but everyone's different like variants of what they wanted to do with it.
Cool. Was there like a kind of like a general brief, or did you
Yep,
set that yourself as well?
yep. There was a general brief. Usually, maybe something like create an illustration or some sort of some such thing with however many characters to
Hmm.
practice composition, perhaps. But for me, I kind of wanted to try maybe a concept art banner that maybe you could see at a convention or something, trying to tailor it just more towards what I thought maybe the people looking at my portfolio
Hmm.
wanted to see.
That's super cool that you was almost like already figuring out your portfolio as you were going along.
Yeah.
Um, I did it the opposite way and the worst way, where I was
Oh no.
like still not figuring out what to put in my portfolio. And then when I graduated, I still had no portfolio. And then Yeah, I definitely struggled with my portfolio, which I guess I don't know how you feel about this, but it's definitely your identity. And I think I realized that I was struggling to find, at least in my art, what I wanted to put in there. It took me a while to figure that out. So it's cool to hear that you already were kind of like knew what you wanted to put in there, and everything was you. Back to the puzzle analogy, you were figuring out the puzzle pieces that you need to put in there. Um, was that something that you did? Like, was that like a natural hunch, or were you like researching into different aspects, and or was it always calling back to the Lord of the Rings Extended Edition?
A lot of it was actually a research and talking to my instructors. I did take a few courses when I was in school, the CGMA
Hmm.
Academy. Just I wanted to practice more environment, more character design, and honestly, just like get more schooling out of the time
Hmm.
that I had. You know what I mean? So I think doing that side research and just kind of trying to figure out what art directors or people hiring would want to see. Just trying to figure that all out. I mean, school
Hmm.
could definitely give you a lot of information, but I think sometimes you have to go seek on your own, especially
Hmm.
if, just to, not everyone's journey is the same. So I think it's good to kind of take initiative and just sort of do your research, explore,
Hmm.
that sort of thing, just to kind of figure out what you want to do.
That is, I think, well, it definitely is great advice, especially for those who are listening that are in that position now, trying to figure out what to do. And either like maybe in my mindset that I always would think like you have to just gather things and figure out your portfolio at the end, as opposed to doing it as you go along, which clearly is the better way, the most efficient way. But what kind of tips would you give? Maybe like a couple of tips, top tips to your younger self, and maybe even those people who are doing it now, where we're like, okay, you're doing all those things, but definitely watch out for A and B and so on.
I'd say, I mean, number one, like, doing all the research and working super hard, it can definitely take its toll. So first of all, self care I think is important, regarding art. Like especially with the feedback, and it can be tough sometimes. So I think
Hmm.
it's good to take a break sometimes. But that said, for younger artists, maybe trying to figure out their portfolio, I think sometimes it might be good to look at maybe a studio that you want to work for. It's a dream job for you, and kind of look at what sort of art they, or styles or art or whatever, what they kind of look for in their
Hmm.
artists. Um, I don't want to say copy it, but maybe you can draw some inspiration if that's where you want to work. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
let's say maybe you want to work on The Last of Us, the next Last of Us. Maybe they're making one of those. Like maybe you have to get into the more realism type design and figure out kind of less. Maybe it's less uh, stylized and more you're looking into what happens in real life, and you're doing that hard studying of just realism. On the other hand, maybe you're really into riot games, and in that case, like,
Hmm.
push the stylization, have fun. I think it's all about just trying to find your place. um, and that's like an easy thing to say and hard thing
Hmm.
to do. But for me, it's just exploring. Like sometimes you want to lock yourself into maybe a specific uh, style or something, but I think it's fun to just try everything. Like, and maybe
Definitely,
maybe you
yeah.
find something. Like for me, I don't usually draw cute stuff. But I tried drawing some cute stuff, and then you kind of learn new things. So it's
Hmm.
always cool to just try to challenge yourself, I guess, too. Sorry, that maybe
Yeah.
is a lot.
No, no, no. That's definitely, I think, great advice. And what you mentioned there as well about challenging yourself, I think that's very important as well. And I know there's like maybe it can be misconstrued about working to a particular style, like to a studio, for example. Like I think I've made the mistake in the past where you kind of maybe take it too literally, but in fact, it's just a case of just trying to see how you can do something that's inspired by, as opposed to just trying to copy. Like you don't want to be a photocopier that kind of does the same thing. You want to be able to add something else to that
Yeah.
universe or that world. And what better way than to tap into something that really inspires you versus something that you think is a chore or a bore? Although sometimes there may be tasks in your careers where you might have to do something that isn't considered exciting, but then at the same time, if you can kind of like loop it back to something that you definitely are inspired by, that is always a win, I think.
Yeah.
Um, you mentioned about different styles, and you also obviously I always happily mention and refer to Lord of the Rings as many times as possible. But what other things were like inspiring you at the time?
I think other than Lord of the Rings, and honestly, like, video games were an inspiration. Final Fantasy 12 was a big
Mhm.
one for me. I love the style, the ornateness, that sort of thing. And of course, like real life, like documentaries. I like watching nature documentaries and stuff like that. That's always, it's just cool to see an animal or a creature that you never knew existed, or
Oh,
something. It
totally.
does something that you, like those birds that kind of change their form and dance around and they look really
Yes. Yeah.
freaky. Like that was just, that's really cool to see, and just kind of adding to your visual library a bit. I know travel is good. I haven't really had much of a chance to travel, but
Same.
I've heard that's good as well for folks. But if you can't do that, I think reading, like observing real life really is, I think, a
Hmm.
good key. There's one thing to kind of be inspired by something that's been already drawn, but I think incorporating things you observe in real life into your art just gives it a grounded nature.
Oh, most definitely. And nature documentaries, they're just the best. Like,
Yeah.
I'm totally with you on that one. And I think that's like my way of hacking, not traveling, is just watching those. And I
Yeah.
think I know which particular one you're talking about, especially that bird
Yeah.
dancing. And it's cool because it's like almost alien like. Like, if you saw that in a Pixar film or even a real film, you think, oh, that's a great idea. Yet it
Yeah.
really exists. And you don't even realize that a bird can make itself change shape like that. Like,
Yeah.
you see fishes do it and all that kind of stuff. But nature documentaries, any particular recommendations you have?
Um,
Or like your go-tos for inspiration?
Planet Earth is a great one. I mean, that's
Yes.
just, it's solid. Any I can really find that, for me, I like especially looking at warmer climates because I live in such a cold one. I like the jungle, and just seeing like the different creatures that I can't find here,
Yeah.
and just observe them as best I can through the TV screen.
Um Planet Earth ones are like absolute gold dust, let alone just in terms of reference for creatures, even like just the way it's shot, the way it's photographed, everything is just it makes Earth just look like cinematic, but without
Yeah.
making it look cinematic. Loads of things, like I love how they go to different uh I don't know, was it ecosystems? I
Yeah.
like each episode's like different ecosystems. Any particular favorite one you have? You mentioned the tropical ones,
Yeah,
but are they like
definitely. I think, yeah, definitely. I think it was South America. I think they were
mhm.
did a one in South America. I find it so fascinating, just the different creatures and the
Mm.
foliage, and it's beautiful. It's so much different from where I live.
I,
And
I
the
just picked up
creatures are
a
colorful.
I just picked up a book on plants and seeds, and even just looking at those is just fascinating. Like the
Yeah.
different forms and how they're made, and they're just so innocuous. You just take them for granted. But when you like analyze them and see them like like chopped up and almost treat like an experiment, there's just so much craziness packed in.
Yeah.
Um, just to throw my favorite ones in there, my favorite particular ones. Again, I was watching that recently as well. Are the deep sea ones, and I know
Oh
they've done
yeah.
Blue Planet as well, just because of the craziness of like the life down there. It is literally beyond alien. Like, I don't think without reference a human can make or come up with a crazy design for a creature than what's already in the deep sea and maybe beyond. Who knows?
Yeah, it's
Um,
ironic almost. You're looking for alien inspiration, but it's just right below you.
yeah, and there's another one as well. I think based on insects. I forgot. I think it's Life on the Undergrowth. Another BBC documentary as well. That's worth checking out. I hate creepy crawlies. Like, I can't stand being near them, but they're absolutely fascinating for like reference and research and all sorts. They're just so cool, in my opinion. It's basically like real life hard surface design, which is kind of what I tend to do.
Oh,
So it's pretty cool with the exoskeletons and you mentioned Last of Us, the ant that has the fungus that grows out of its head, and
Yeah.
all those crazy things. Is the nature's crazy. Like, even not just even visually, like how it functions. Like we
Yeah.
mentioned, that was it zombie ants and all these other things, how they interact and influence each other. It's just brain fuel.
Yeah, it's amazing just the different connections between the animals, the creatures,
Mm.
the life basically, and how it all kind of works together and how it evolved, how it how it works, like how physiology works and stuff on different animals, like why it
Yeah,
changes. It's really fascinating.
and even like sorry to geek out on this kind of stuff.
That's
Like
good.
this is just I love this stuff. Even like prehistory and ancient history and how things have
Yeah.
evolved. Like I still can't wrap my head around how long it takes for things to evolve and how much they've changed. And um, like obviously dinosaurs are a big one. You know, they've been well documented mainly because of some of the greatest films ever made. At least one, Jurassic Park. Um, not sure about the rest, at least critically. But you know, like how we're talking about birds, they've come from dinosaurs, and you know, when I think I learned that first time in the Jurassic Park, Alan Grant teaching me at the age of before 10 years old that they came from birds, and you're thinking what, and then obviously you understand the concept of evolution and how that works, and you think, wow, like how things shrink from being so gigantic and enormous based on, I think, the climate and the atmosphere and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And then, have you seen King Kong, the Peter Jackson one,
Yeah.
and those huge millipedes and centipedes, whatever
Oh.
they were, and like realizing that back then they would have been that big as well. Like I would have died just seeing one
Yeah,
almost
just a heart
immediately.
attack right there.
Yeah. But like creatures. So when did you realize that that was something that you wanted to specialize in?
I think let's see. I, I was working in Beamdog mostly, doing sort of everything, but I think it was when I got to uh, Improbable, which is now Inflexion Games, working
Hmm.
on Nightingale, that I just like kind of fell in love with creature
Hmm.
design, just because of the stuff we were working on was so cool, and it just connected with me so well that it just kind of I kind of felt like this is just like a passion of mine that I want to hold
Yeah.
on to. And of course, I think it's good to expand and be able to do concepts of, let's say, props and
Hmm.
environments and keyframes and stuff. But it's always nice to have something that you really like cherish, I think.
Yeah. That's quite interesting. So it was basically on a job, like
Yeah,
you discovered that was kind of like, I guess, what you would say is your thing now, I guess, or
I
like at least
think
your
so.
main go-to source of creation. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, just working on the project and getting to interpret these creatures within the bounds of the universe we were creating. It
Hmm.
was just so fascinating, and I was working with coworkers who were helping me to uh, improve the creature designs,
Hmm.
physiology, and I ended up taking a course. Oh, was it 2018 with Simon Lee?
Hmm.
And that was amazing. Like, he just taught me so much more about getting the most out of creature designs,
Hmm.
and yeah, just kind of having more than just a design, but having something someone can connect with.
Hmm.
Was really cool experience.
Wow. We'll get back to that for sure.
Okay.
So that was like on your second studio that you'd work for, so straight after school. Because you
Yeah.
said you got into studio, was it straight away or was there a
Yeah,
bit of a gap? Yeah.
Beamdog was yeah, about right after I graduated, about a month after
Cool.
I moved up to Edmonton to work, and then I worked there for a couple years, I think, and then
Hmm.
I moved to Improbable Canada, which is now Inflexion Games.
Hmm. And what was that experience like jumping straight in? Was it a smooth transition for yourself, or was it a bit kind of like jumping into the deep end?
Honestly, the studio, the culture that I was introduced to at Beamdog was super welcoming, so it wasn't
Yeah.
really daunting. I mean, of
Hmm.
course, the fact that you're going into a professional job was daunting, but the people I worked with made it just really fun and not stressful, and it was a good time, I think. Like it wasn't as stressful as I think as it could have been.
Yeah.
But everyone was so helpful and kind and just wanted to kind of work together to create these cool things. It was kind of it was a neat experience because I'd never had studio experience before, so I
Hmm.
think it was a really good one to start out with.
And what was your kind of like first impressions of being in a studio? Was it like everything you expected? Was it better than you expected? Or was it a bit like, oh, okay, I thought it'd be kind of like maybe a bit more. But what was your kind of like impressions on getting into a studio for the first time? Because you have these kind of like images and imagination of like you dreamt it for so long and you want to get into this situation and now you're there. Yeah. So what was it like?
I think it was really cool. I mean, just meeting, first of all, meeting folks that worked on games that you love and
Hmm.
you love their style and you get to talk with them and work with them. That's really amazing. But yeah, I was a little worried going in, as like a greenhorn, like what is it going to be like working in a studio, a game studio in specific. But it was honestly really, it was fun. I think there's always the hard work
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
everything, and of course you're gonna have bad days. But I think for me it was the folks there, and that
Hmm.
everyone wanted to try hard to make cool things, and it was just kind of like a nice kind of community.
Hmm. And have you experienced that like throughout your career so far? Like, would you say you definitely enjoy working within that studio environment, particularly with others?
Yeah, I'd say like I know the pandemic has changed things for sure. I work remote right now, but
Hmm.
I throughout the career my career where I was in studio, it was always a really good time for me. I can say that I'm probably lucky that I've never had a bad experience
Hmm.
in a studio. But going from Beamdog to Inflexion Games, it was just like even more great people who are really driven to create the best thing that they can. And that
Oh,
in itself is inspiring when you're working with all these people who are just like so driven and they're so good at
yes.
what they do and they're just so willing to teach you more. It's like it's really like liberating almost.
Oh, totally. Like, there's something. So I've yet to work in a studio in a creative sense, but I have worked in team situations in other jobs,
Mhm.
and I can totally concur with you. Where it's like there is something powerful, almost like a different kind of energy when you're working with people and when what you do has an impact on your teammates. And equally, they can drag you down if there's a wrong balance, and you can drag them down if there's a imbalance. And obviously, when you're going for a collective goal, that obviously makes sense. But when things click, and then you realize that if, at least in my opinion, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this as well, but like sometimes if you did it all by yourself, you'd maybe feel like every single ache and like pain and every single movement is just like, oh god, what am I doing? But when it's like, okay, this is gonna really help the team, or this is gonna really help excel or elevate this particular idea even further, it's almost like you don't feel that.
Yeah,
It's yeah,
the
it's like a weird
collaboration.
boost. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Like working for yourself. It's fun sometimes. Like you get if you're doing personal work, but
Hmm.
when you're part of a project, it's just very motivating to know that you're working on something that someone else is going to take and hopefully make better. And it's just
Hmm.
kind of like inspiring each other, like this constant inspiration loop, I guess, where you're hopefully inspiring the designers. Maybe you see something from writing
Hmm.
that it's like I got to make a concept of that and try to get that in. It's cool to kind of work with these different disciplines and have them influence you.
Mm. What's your favorite part of the creative process?
I think for me, I like just coming up with ideas. I think like the sketch phase is pretty fun. Like I I
Hmm.
I also really like rendering out stuff beautifully, but I think it's the certain freedom where you're just in that space where you're like, okay, I can just like explore with what I want and see what weird ideas I can come up with. That is kind of the exciting phase. And it is exciting too when like someone you narrow down an idea and it's just like you're kind of whittling away on this like piece or something. You're just trying to find that like I guess the gold or the gold hidden in this rock. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
analogy.
that's a good analogy. My daughter just started playing Animal Crossing again today, and a lot
Ooh.
of it is like that. So like so yeah, definitely gone off on a tangent. When she first got that game, she basically made me build the island for her, and I
Yeah.
remember like making sure it had all the best stuff. I think apples are the ones that generate the most. Is it bells? I think the currency is. So everything was. I made it all like 5-star. So I challenged her to start again, and realizing that all the things you have to do to kind of like build it up and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know why I had to mention that, but it just reminded me of Animal Crossing.
Oh, I love that game.
Ideas, it's the best. I actually thought it was, from what I heard, I just thought, oh yeah, I'm not gonna like this, and then I realized like how addictive it is. Well,
Oh,
yeah, I saw it when I was playing it till 2 a.m. But I had to get up like early the next day, which reminded me of my old gaming days where. Yeah, I definitely wasted a lot of time when I could have been doing other things, but it's really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that playing video games and stuff isn't a waste of time. I mean, it's a way to to spend time to make yourself happy, and maybe you're inspired by something. And honestly, I always think it's good to take breaks. To
Oh
be
no, no,
honest.
for sure. Yeah, no, just to 100%. I agree with you. Gaming is awesome. It's one of the best
Yeah.
things that humans have ever invented. However, what I was referring to is more my addictive personality,
Ah.
and maybe a better way to rephrase it is I know how destructive it can be towards my time.
Yeah.
I remember so I used to work shift work, and my shift didn't start until in the afternoon. I would wake up at 6 a.m. when my wife would get up to go to work. I would get to a uniform to get my uniform on, and I would sit there playing my game until I had to leave to get to work. So I was being super efficient, making sure that I got enough time to put into my game. But then I realized that, okay, this is not really helping me progress my career. So I use that same energy into the art stuff, the
Yeah.
same kind of like habits and stuff. And then now that's kind of okay. I've gone back into gaming and I'm stuck on at the moment Gran Turismo. I just can't stop playing that. Um, but yeah, games are awesome. But ideation, that's also one of my favorite phases. I think it's probably for everybody. Like it is just coming up with new stuff, and especially like you said, like finding gold. You're not creating gold, you're trying to find it, right? Like when it
Yeah.
comes to ideas, and it's almost like every pen stroke is chipping away with it at the pickaxe.
Yeah.
Um, do you ever get lost in ideas though? Because I've had that criticism labeled at me since college days, and I really struggle with that sometimes where I can really get lost in exploring. How do you keep that reined in, and at least professionally speaking, how do you make sure that doesn't derail the goals of the project and also your own as well?
Usually, before I start ideation, I usually have like maybe a reference board or some notes that kind of create somewhat of a box for me to create in. That said, sometimes I like to poke out of the box because sometimes people want to see the weird ideas. So I
Mhm,
think it's important to have maybe a mix of ideas that are kind of expected from the feedback that you're given, but also experiment because you never know. Like an art director may see this really strange idea that you've created that doesn't necessarily work with the details you've been given, but it works somehow.
mhm,
So I think it's a mix of wanting to explore and express your own ideas, but also being reminded to kind of stick to the direction if you've been
mhm,
given a
mhm,
certain direction, or if you're making something up yourself, maybe you give yourself some rules like this is a quadruped. It lives in this environment.
mhm.
This is how it eats, and from those kind of just little sentences, you can kind of pick apart. Okay, like so if another animal lives in a desert environment, how does it eat? How does it survive? And you can kind of pick apart these pieces to kind of support your
Mm.
concept, if that makes sense.
And does your process differ when it's your personal stuff versus client or professional stuff, or is it roughly the same for you?
Pretty much the same, I'd say. I like to just kind of keep with that reference building,
Hmm.
sketching, and then building it up. In the past, I actually, I think I jumped the gun a bit a lot on my personal work, where I would just go right to, like, I thought I had an idea that I
Hmm.
thought was great, and I would just skip right to the end, and then I'm like, well, I could have probably explored this more. So I'm trying now to just, like, take my time and kind of, I think personal work is a good chance to just kind of break away from that fast pacedness of the studio environment and just sort of
Yes.
settle and figure out, like, just do a project, and it doesn't matter how long it takes as long as you finish it you
Mm.
know It-
Um, I can totally relate to that. Like a big chunk of when I was building my portfolio, which is still kind of undone, is not undone, not done yet. But it's enough to at least like be passable as a portfolio. A lot of it was jumping straight to the end. For me, it was well, I used to tell myself to make myself feel better. The reason why I did that was because of time constraints, which was the
yep.
case. But also I think maybe it was kind of like that greed of I got this idea, let's flesh it out. Yet similar to yourself, very recently it's gone kind of going back to let's explore the idea, let's flesh it out, let's really see is this what we want to do before you
Yeah.
kind of jump into it as well. Do you find that does that change often for you? Do you find like okay after doing the exploration phase for a while you decide that now I want to go straight into it and see how that is? Like do you change a fair bit? Because I find that with myself I do. I don't know if it's because I have a short attention span or things like that, but I do tend to like switch up my process a little bit for some reason. So I haven't figured out why yet. But for
Okay.
you, is that the case, or do you or like once you've got kind of got a formula or a process, you are happy to just develop that and then see how that
Yeah.
changes over
I
time?
I think, like, I don't want to say I have, like, a hard set process, because
Sure.
depending on the project it could change. Sometimes clients want to see more realistic things uh as sketches. So sometimes you're kind of feeling like you're skipping a certain phase to get to the realistic portion of it.
Hmm.
Um but I think for me, I kind of stick with the same of reference, letterboard, word board, whatever. Just trying to come up with ideas that kind of goes into sketching, and then you're trying to figure it out along, like, just refine it. That's kind of just what I stick with usually. As I find, like, I just don't want to get back into the habit of like, the attention span for me is jumping the gun and just
Hmm.
being like, hey, I
Yeah,
just got
yeah,
to
yeah.
finish this. For me, it was a bit of feeling just weirdly rushed in my own personal time, and I realized that my personal time, like, I can afford to just take time
Hmm.
and explore these ideas, and it's a great chance to just, like I said, explore ideas without a time constraint.
Mm. And with your personal projects now, like, do you kind of just do them as and when they happen? Like, did they just happen and you just kind of like plod along, or do you definitely set aside some time and not force yourself to do them, but kind of like be okay? Now we're doing personal stuff. Let's go.
Yeah, I find it's really weird. Sometimes I go through like hardcore phases of a few months. I'm just, like, trucking along on projects, and then I get tired and I need some time to just game. Um, uh, but I think, like, for some people it might be good to have a set uh, schedule. Maybe every day you draw a little bit or something like
Hmm.
that. Just something to kind of keep it going. For me, a lot of the times it's I just get inspired by something, or I see something as I'm flipping through Reddit, and like I see a creature and I'm like, oh, that's cool. So I'll add it to my
Yes.
library, and I always have like, a few pages of sketches kind of going on just to get inspired by if I want to go back and make them into a final piece. It's nice just to have a variety of things, I think,
Yeah.
to work on.
And with your projects, like, do you have a kind of like a little universe going on, or is it just more insular, like a piece of art? Let's just make this thing, and then, or is it kind of a bit of both?
Sometimes a bit of both. Lately, it's just been more kind of one-off type stuff. Just sort of exploring different things, I think.
Hmm.
Although I would like to go back and do a project that's kind of a more tightly knit sort of thing.
Hmm.
I did one like that a few years ago, but the pieces didn't hold up as I thought they would now, so I kind of took it down. So I'm like, oh, I'll redo
Ah,
that one
okay,
day,
okay,
you know?
that's cool. Again, something similar as well. Like I've been looking back at some of the old stuff and realizing that okay, I remember back then I thought, yeah, this is the best I can do, and it was. But now it's like, and I guess it's a good sign of progression. That okay, whoa, what was I thinking that this was good? Like there's a lot of flaws, there's a lot wrong with this, but at the same time, and I'm sure it was the case for you as well. Like I really like the idea, so now it is a case of like, okay, similar to yourself, took it down, put it back in the oven, so to speak, and
Yeah.
almost not like what Disney doing with like the live action remakes of their old cartoons like Lion King and stuff, but almost like a reimagining of current skills.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
think
what?
that's yeah. Sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
sorry to interrupt. What was you like? What would you say was the thing that decided that that wasn't working for you? Was it something specific, or more like your connection wasn't the same? I don't know if that's too philosophical, so to speak, but for me, it was something like yeah, it wasn't holding up to. It's basically abstract. It wasn't holding up to what I thought that it should be, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I think so. Like every once in a while I'll go through my portfolio and just sort of assess each piece and kind of think, look, how does this represent my art now, and
Mm,
does it really? Um I guess it is tough, like, it's hard to let go of your babies, as it said sometimes. But I think it honestly gives a good chance to, you kind of cut that out, and then that gives you kind of more leeway to just create new stuff. And
hmm
I always like keeping my old projects, because I always like going back and being like, well, what if I redid this somehow? Like, how
Yeah.
would I change it? How would I break it down and make it more interesting based on what I've learned over the years? So I think it's good not to just totally get rid of all your old stuff, but just to
Yes.
keep it. And it's cool to see what you were doing back then. And then it's also cool to see the progression. And there's also
hmm
ideas, like obviously there are cool ideas in there, or you wouldn't have drawn it.
Oh, for sure. And I think even more like in a motivational sense, sometimes we all have our highs and lows, like you mentioned before, Zan. Sometimes have those downers where maybe you start beginning to really doubt yourself and thinking, I'm not as good as I thought I was, or I can be that good. And then you look back through some of your stuff, and then you see that kind of like I don't know, that creative fire almost like in the page, and
Yeah.
thinking, oh, you were having fun back then. So you realize that you're able to do it back then. Where's it gone? And you realize it wasn't nothing to do with being bad or getting worse. It was something else. Almost
Mhm.
like you lost a connection, so to speak. So yeah, I totally agree with you. Like only because I'm not very good at organizing my stuff. I have a lot of old sketchbooks lying around, not in the same place. As I said, I'm not organized, but they're there somewhere. And also like even digitally, a lot of the files and stuff they are backed up in folders, etc., etc. And some of the stuff I was looking back again recently as well, I was thinking, why did I never finish that? That was quite cool. Better than what I was probably going to do more recently. So yeah, I think that's a really cool takeaway for a lot of people that are listening now to kind of like go back and revisit some of your stuff and in a way look back to move forward, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. You just maybe you find something like a shape or a color or
Yes.
something that just like that clicks with you, and you're thinking, like, oh, well, now I can make this better. I know better shape language now. I know composition, what have you. Either way, it's going to be better.
Yeah,
I think.
precisely. And I think a lot of it is that like you do get stuck in a rut sometimes, or you kind of like hit your limit. We mentioned gaming, like when you're playing those sandbox open world games, any game where you kind of like reach the end of the level where it never lets you past, and that's
Hmm.
kind of like where you are. But then you progress and realize, oh no, you can, or you've unlocked that feature, and then you can go further on. And real world examples, or like I guess of our peers, and even people we look up to, it happens a lot. Like Avatar, for example, was you could say the same thing. James Cameron getting to a point where he realized that at this point in time, I can't make this. His was more like, I guess, a technical limitation. He just closed that sketchbook and then waited until things progressed. And I guess for an artist point of view, it's a case of you just let your own kind of like technology, your own skills progress before you can kind of go back in. So yeah, it's like yeah, that's quite a cool way to look at it. Like a time capsule. You probably left that idea because you reach your limitation, and then now you've progressed, you can go back, or like you completed a game, you go back and do it again, like a speed run, and you know all all the moves, all
Yeah.
the corners. You unlocked all the weapons, and you go again.
Yeah, exactly. I like that analogy.
um, and gaming. Actually, no. Before we get into gaming, back to your reference process. I'm always fascinated by how people gather their references, and obviously spoken a lot about what inspires you. But what is your process like? Do you have like a kind of go-to, or is it very project specific, which dictates what you're looking for? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd say it's fairly project specific. Definitely, if there's a specific world or universe you're working in, there's
Hmm.
kind of like preset ideals that you want to stick to. Um, but yeah, I guess it really depends on the the project. I'd say.
Cool. And regarding the rest of your journey, so was it after you worked on Nightingale? What was the name of the studio that you changed to? So you
Uh,
changed name.
After yeah, so I after Beamdog, I went to Improbable Canada,
Uh huh.
and then Improbable Canada then became Inflexion Games. So same
Right.
studio, just I think a renaming, if I understand
Sure.
correct.
Sure.
I don't
Sure.
know the full thing, but
Cool.
yeah. So after I worked on there for about 4 years,
Hmm.
and then I thought I would take a chance at film.
Ah, cool. And how did that work? Like, how did you decide to make that jump? Like, was there something kind of like an offer? Did you just put your stuff out there, or
Yeah, it
was it something else?
was I think a bit of putting myself out there, and I knew
Hmm.
some folks online, like Instagram and whatnot, that were worked in film, and I loved their work, and it was just super inspiring, and I knew I wanted to work with them.
Hmm.
So it was just constantly just for me it was a bit tough. Like I didn't want to leave the studio that I
Sure.
was having so much fun at, but at the same time, it was a new challenge that I wanted to go after. So for me, it was you just send resumes out and you try
Hmm.
your best, and then you get a call one day when you're not expecting it. Really,
Cool.
often I think sometimes jobs offers happen like you put your resumes and stuff out there, and I think it's good to distract yourself in a way. A lot of people will say, yeah, this job just landed in my lap,
Sure.
but it probably didn't. You just distracted yourself and you worked really hard,
Mm.
and it just came back, and then now it's yours. So I think it's important to just send resumes out there. Like the worst they can say is no, and yes, it does
Yes.
hurt. It does hurt.
Yeah.
um, but just keep trying. I think like the best thing you can do is just um, keep pressing on, and eventually you'll find a place that like kind of clicks with you, I think.
Hmm.
um,
And was your jump? Was it ILM? Is that what the
yeah,
movie
yeah,
was where you got to work on films?
yeah, yeah, it was
Cool.
Inflection Games to Industrial Light and Magic. Yeah.
And how do you find the difference between working on game? Obviously, there are obvious differences in terms of how long they take to make and the things they need. But what are your was noticeable difference in terms of film and games working in those
I'd
industries?
say a film for me has been a more fast-paced experience.
Mhm.
um, I'm still learning about the industry myself, but that's kind of mostly what I've taken away is a kind of a faster pace, and looking for more of a potentially higher quality sooner, I think.
Mm.
Um, for example, maybe instead of having just basic black and white silhouettes, uh, it might be better to have something that gives a little bit more information, because of the fast paced nature of things
Mm.
and just what people are expecting. So I'm still figuring that out myself, but that's kind of I like it, the fast pace, to be honest. But it's also fun because you never know what you're going to work on next.
Cool.
It's an exciting experience to me.
And like I think for some, and not just in terms of art, it's just generally like changes is something that really throws people off.
Yeah.
And having something that's predictable is better to manage. Do you enjoy the fact that you don't know what's coming next, and it's kind of like a game show? You open the envelope, find out what you have to do, and then
Yeah,
try and get the top
it's a
score.
kind of exciting experience, Like I'm working remote, I spend a lot of time at home. It's a very
Hmm.
not stale, but it's a very expected day-to-day experience. So I can honestly say that when I open a new task and I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to get today, it's just sort of like a, a shot of adrenaline a bit. You don't know what the next challenge is going to be.
That
It's interesting. It could be anything, It could be way different from the last one. It could be the same. It's just, yeah, it's just cool to see the variety, I guess,
mhm.
of things that you're creating.
Now that's actually true, and there is something cool, especially at the beginning of a project when you get that new brief and something different to what you've done before. And obviously, like you mentioned, one of your favorite phases is the audition phase. So it's kind of like getting your teeth into this
Yeah.
fresh raw carcass, to use a crude example.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's super cool. In terms of like working from home, because you worked in studio and now you're basically working remotely.
Yeah.
Working from home is different to working remotely as well, right? Like working
Yeah.
from home implies that it's just you, whereas remotely it's still a studio type situation, but you're in your own place. Obviously,
Yeah.
I'm sure that was a result of the pandemic
Yeah.
as to why you're at home. But yeah, I'd love to hear your experiences and I guess the pros and cons for you of working from home.
Yeah, so I think for me, I like having my own space, and for like working with the team, like a lot of the times you have uh, chat rooms or Zoom or anything like so. For me, it's not as big of an issue. Like if I need feedback, there's
Hmm.
always people around. It's not like you try not to close yourself off. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
you are remote, but it takes a bit of effort to uh, try to still be part of that community and not just close yourself off entirely.
Hmm.
Um, so it's important to keep in contact with folks and always ask for feedback. And
Mm.
for me, it's become a norm in a way. Like I have my own space, but I also I'm able to get feedback pretty quick from my coworkers. Like everyone's works really well together and is understanding of life circumstance. And
Hmm.
some people are working from home, some people aren't. Um, yeah, so I think it depends on the person. If you're a person that really craves that social energy, it might be better to be in an office.
Mm.
But for me, I'm not a huge fan of commutes, and right now I live out of the city in a kind of a quaint little area. So
Hmm.
it's somewhat of a dream for me to be able to work remotely, and not have to deal with the commutes or
Hmm.
uh, renting in the city with a big dog or all those challenges. I personally am like an advocate for work from home. I think it's a sense of freedom, and I think if you trust the people that you're hiring to work remote, it shouldn't be an issue. um,
Hmm.
it has to do with, do you trust this person to get their work done?
Mm.
And if they do, then that's good. But
Yeah, I think that's a great point there about trust. Like, I think a lot of our job, especially as anywhere where you're part of a team, trust is absolutely
yeah,
key. Like, because it just really it removes the worry aspect from the people you're working with and working for. And
yeah,
it's just a case of like, let's take gaming for example. You trust that when you put your controller on, it's going to work,
yeah,
and then you can play your game. You don't want your stick to stick and then ruin whatever you're trying to do, and you want everything to work properly. And I guess it's kind of like, not to turn this into inanimate objects, but it's kind of like the same thing where it's you want everything to be smooth and all the pieces to fit, at least back to the puzzle analogy, and
yeah,
then everything is going to be great. Working from home and remotely is something that I do as well.
yeah,
And for me, it just suits, like, we're on the same page in that regard. Like, it's just, I wouldn't say heaven, but it's quite close in terms of
yeah. It
like
is nice.
having that flexibility and not that rigidity of being in a particular place. Although, again, that was in a job that wasn't a creative job. So it was, I would say, way more rigid than it would be in, say, a creative environment, for example.
Yeah,
But even then, like having your own space, being able to be flexible for people that I'm responsible for is super helpful as well. But equally, I know of a lot of friends and family who struggle with that as well. And like
mm,
you mentioned that before, like some people do want to be maybe just simply not at home or just not in that closed environment. So it is super interesting how it's affecting people not the same way. Kind of
yeah,
the whole pandemic. It's weird that it's 3 years now. It is, yeah, 3 years. That it's happened. That's like Lord of the Rings came out one every year. That's like all three Lord of the Rings had come out, and then that time has lapsed.
Yeah.
How did that affect you in any particular way? Like, obviously, apart from the usual stuff where having to be locked down and all that isolation and whatnot, but did it kind of like have any, you could say, like lasting impressions upon you as a creative, let alone as a person?
Um, as a creative, I think. I mean, it was really it was a very weird time. We were like, we're going to be out of the office for 2 weeks. See you
Oh
guys.
no.
See you in two
Yeah,
weeks.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then years later, so it was a bit jarring. To be in this environment where everyone's collaborating, and then you have to kind of reconstruct that. And I think the company I worked with did a really good job of that, trying to keep the community together, even though we were all working from home and that sort of thing. And
Hmm, hmm.
and having check-ins with my boss, and just even meetings of just discussing creative ideas and stuff like that. Keeping the communication going was really important for me. Um, I mean, that said, I like my own space, but I also don't like to be totally alone, which is very
Hmm.
contradictory. So I think it's important to, utilize whatever it is, Zoom, Google, what have you, and still try to include the folks that are remote, and that sort of thing. Just trying to hold it all together. And I think
Hmm.
the trust is a big aspect of that. You got to trust that the folks that you're hiring for remote, are going to do work. And
Yeah.
there's a misconception, I think, of people who work from home. We don't work, and that's not very true, is it?
Nah. I'll put it this way: when the pandemic happened, I was still at my previous job. That was a sales job, and that was when the even though we was in store at that point in time, when I was working remotely and we had to log in and stuff, everything had a timestamp on it, and
Oh.
if we saw that everybody was working way more than they would have if it was in store, like
Yeah,
actual raw work, because it was all monitored, and a lot of people out of fear thought that if I'm not doing this, um, it's going to be repercussions, especially with the whole at that point in time in the background you're hearing that okay, the world's going to shut down, people are going to lose their jobs, like people were losing their jobs.
yeah,
Fortunately they gave us a small payment where they basically guaranteed income if companies were shutting down for a certain period of time, or the government gave companies funding to pay their employees and all
mm,
sorts as well. So all that happening, and it was really strange that you'd think at home in that environment where you have, at least in that situation, it was people constantly being able to see. And fortunately for us, the people that were in charge of us were aware of that. They said, just chill out. They forced us to have breaks.
yeah,
Yet I've seen people who companies were using that to their advantage and saying like, oh, we've seen that you haven't typed enough characters or done this amount of work, and kind of like really using that against the
yeah,
workforce, and it was really tacky. So I think for a creative, I don't think that has been the case,
yeah,
and I think in that situation, it's a great situation. But I think in other industries, it's been an absolute, well, a nightmare.
yeah.
In some cases.
That's totally fair. I don't know much about other
Hmm,
industries,
hmm.
but yeah, I think I'll just go back to it. Like, for remote work, I think it's just about trusting the people that you're working with. I think that's
Yeah.
a big deal. Like having that trust, coworkers, employees. It relieves stress. It makes for a less tension environment.
Hmm.
Anyway, that's just kind of a tangent, but
No, no, it's all good. And would you say like this is the preferred way for you going forward now?
yeah, I'd say so. Like, I'm totally like visiting offices and stuff, but
Hmm.
I think for me, just personally, being able to have, not necessarily the free, both kind of like a freedom to have my own creative space where I can kind of tailor it to what helps me. Like, when I'm in a studio environment and there's lots of noise going on, it can be very
Hmm.
anxiety inducing and distracting. But at home I can just kind of close it off and put some music on. I have a chat with someone who's helping me give me feedback. It works really well. And I also find that my dog is a lot happier.
Hey,
So
cool.
like, I mean, that touches my heart. So
I think you nailed something there where it's about your creative space.
yeah,
And when you're creative, like space is super important. Even though
yeah,
we need that, maybe it's the A3 or A4 sheet of paper or whatever standard size anyone else out there listening uses, environment is absolutely key. The vibe is
yeah,
absolutely key. I remember when, again, I was at work, so to keep going on about my sales job, but on my lunch break, it was always about finding somewhere to draw. And I had specific coffee shops that I would always go to because the vibe
yeah,
was good. And
yeah, yeah,
even the certain tables, if they were taken, would kind of ruin my vibe a little bit. But they were even in those spaces, little better spaces, that just really helped. And yeah, I think mood is key. At least just for me. But it sounds like for a lot of creatives, like whether they realize it or not, it's always running in the back of our minds, right?
yeah, yeah. It's definitely like if you have an environment where you're comfortable, it's just easier to create, I think. And
Hmm.
some people like surrounding themselves with video games, anything that inspires them. Really, like it's fun to just have a space where it's just tailored to inspiring your own creativity.
And speaking of creativity, I really like how creative your designs are.
Oh,
Like when
thank
you look
you.
at them, it's like they're very well presented. Obviously, you're a professional artist. They're going to be, not take anything away from how you do it, but it's almost like as a professional, we always expect just art to look great, right? Like we always see art of books and everything just looks great.
Mhm.
But then there's always that like when you see the art, when you see someone's made something, you're always looking at, which I've started to refer to as the soul of the artist. Like you see it kind of like shine through, and you can definitely see it in your work. Um,
Oh.
is that something that you kind of, would you say, do deliberately, or is it just purely zoning in and just seeing what kind of comes out?
For me, generally, like when I'm creating a piece, I like to try to uh, hold on to a mood that the piece is trying to portray. So I do like putting emotion into the work. Like I think that adds a lot to artwork. Is if you're trying to elicit emotion from someone or express your own, that sort of thing. That makes everything more powerful.
Yes.
Like even if there's just two characters and in the scene and you're trying to find ways to connect them and you just like try to find an emotion, a mood, and then
Mhm.
how can these characters interact with each other to portray this mood? Maybe it's tension, maybe it's sadness, whatever it is. I think it's important to kind of get into that headspace and uh just feel a variety of emotions and don't be afraid of that because that's what makes your work better, in my opinion.
And how do you reference that? How do you research that? Because those things are very abstract. You can't pick them up in a
Yeah,
bottle or find them in a book. So
that's
how
a
are you
tough
kind of
one.
like understanding what those kind of things are?
I think this is a tough. It's a mix of I think personal life experience and observation of others,
Hmm.
empathy, that sort of thing. Just kind of being in tune with your emotions and how other people feel, and just because like video games and movies and especially The Last of Us, it's about um it's about relationships between people and it's about emotion, and that's what people hold on to the most, I think. The piece could look absolutely beautiful, but if there's an emotion behind it that the viewer can catch on to, I think that just makes it more memorable to them. um, so so I guess that kind of leads back to how to practice that. And I think it just boils down to not being afraid of expressing your emotions.
Hmm.
Whether you're angry or you're sad or you're anything, like just kind of directing that into your art. One is
Hmm.
therapeutic, and two, I think it just makes it powerful.
Mm. And is that something that has always come naturally to you? Have you always been kind of like aware of that, or is that something you've had to kind of discover and develop yourself?
Honestly, it's a little weird. Like when I was younger, I drew a lot of portraits, like hyper-realistic portraits, and my mom always said, "The eyes, Amy. There's something in the eyes." And I'm like, I kind of held on to that a bit. I think, like, I
Oh.
think just uh the tiny details around like expressions. I mean, observing expressions is a big deal, but just like the tiny things of how the light hits the eye and how that makes people like change the emotion, and just paying attention to those little things that like connect each other, so we can connect to each other. Like art is all about connection, and I
Yes,
think
yes.
like yeah, just kind of feeling that emotion as you're drawing, I think helps. And it sucks if you have life experience and you're drawing a really depressing piece, like
Uh-huh.
that can be sad, but at the same time it can be actually really therapeutic.
Of therapy for sure. Like there's a lot of things I've read recently where it's almost being used as a form of medication
Yeah.
for people who potentially, well, they're not particularly creative. Like it's not their go-to. And it is something like we've all experienced it. Anyone's ever drawn something or painted something or created something where it's like if you are feeling something and you start making something, it's just naturally just contaminates it, almost, to
Yeah.
use a different word. Like it just goes through. Like I dabble in making music and stuff. I wouldn't call it
Oh,
music, I just
yeah.
make beats. And listening back to some of the, like we mentioned before, I go into older stuff, looking at older stuff, I was thinking, wow, you were not very good back then. But at the same time, you remember either the moment you were in when you made it, and sometimes it does sound like an emotion, or even art stuff as well. Like you can tell with maybe the color palette you're using.
Mhm.
And I've heard other artists mention this as well. I believe David Levine mentioned that he was going through some dark times, and literally his work was coming out very dark and gloomy.
Yeah.
Um, and it's only through observation he recognized that. Whereas if you're not observing, it's still happening. It's still like kind of
Yeah.
imprinting upon your stuff, and it's just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it is
Yeah,
very interesting the way our inner emotions kind of just reflect into art that we're making, subconsciously even. You don't know what
yeah,
you're doing, but it's just it just makes it powerful to me. It's more than
definitely.
just a pretty picture. It's something with like something real behind it.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like with just emotions in general. It's it's like the human brain, biology, or whatever, or the existence can't help but let it out. And
Yeah.
whatever that, let's say emotions and energy, like electricity and energy or whatever, it has to end up somewhere. And sometimes it ends up in that interaction where you can have a terrible argument with somebody and be horrible, or they be horrible to you, or just in your demeanor where you kind of like internalize it, or in art and it kind of like exits that way. It's
Yeah.
weird. It's like, have you seen what happens to a tree when it gets hit by lightning?
Yeah.
And you see like almost exactly where the energy
Yeah.
traveled through. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's cool how as more as I observe art and creativity, and particularly film, especially stuff that, like, obviously I grew up on the classic Hollywood stuff, Jurassic Park, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars. Yeah, nowadays I'm more into, I guess you could say, more real and more people stuff.
Yeah.
Like more about relation. So speaking of which, are you aware of? I think it's called Flowers. It's a TV show.
Oh,
It's
I
on
haven't.
Netflix.
I haven't heard of
Have you
that.
seen The White Lotus?
Yes.
Have you seen the second
Yes.
season?
Yes. I love it.
So his name's. I'll send you the link. His name's Will. So he's the dude who's newly rich. The two couples.
Yeah.
So Aubrey Plaza's other half. I
Yeah.
think his name's Will. I forget his name's Will Sharp. His name is.
Okay.
So he's a writer director. He's an all rounder, right?
Mhm.
So it's his show. Just check it out. It's absolutely
Oh,
amazing. It's funny.
yes.
It's witty. It's sad. It's everything,
It's
and it's
everything. Yeah.
it's it's wild. I'll send you the link. It's called Flower or
Yeah.
Flowers. It's basically a family. They're called the Flowers. Every
Okay.
single individual is just, it's out there. Another bit of trivia. Have you seen the Loki show?
The Loki show. No, I haven't.
Yeah.
I've just so
Oh,
many things I
okay.
got to catch up on, man.
So the actress in there is also in Flower or
Oh,
Flowers. That's
okay.
actually his wife. So it's a bit of, it's just really cool. It's just amazing. But that's just to get my point across. That is something that's about people, a
Yep.
family. But it's still got loads of coolness happening around. There's an artist in the show as well, making cool art. It's brilliant. And that's the kind of stuff that nowadays is like, wow, like how do you get that kind of vibe and emotion into an image or a piece of art, which doesn't have to be an image. We use the image as like a vessel to kind of get that story across.
Yeah.
Like Tolkien did it in Lord of the Rings, where, like I said to my daughter yesterday, the map on Lord of the Rings, when it shows you the whole of Middle Earth, I believe that is Tolkien's exact depiction of Middle Earth. So it's cool to see that that was the actual author's vision of the world that he recreated.
Mhm.
So yeah, all these little things, like it's just interesting. And I totally forgot my point. Just
That's
speaking
okay.
about people and emotions and all that kind of stuff. So in terms of like shows, we mentioned The White Lotus, which is brilliant. Um, what other things have you seen recently? You mentioned Last of Us. I'm sure we'll get to that in a second as well.
Yeah.
But what other things have you seen recently that have just been like blowing socks off?
Oh, let me see. Honestly, Legend of Vox Machina is just fun. I'm a D and
Okay.
D. I'm a D&D
Okay.
person. So that's fun. Let me think something more. What else have I been watching? Um, Rewatching Carnival Row.
I haven't seen that.
Mostly, I love the world building. It's fascinating. It's this mix between 1800s steampunk, diesel punk, and fae, like
Mm-hmm.
fairies and mythical creatures, and it's just a really interesting social statement, but also just the connections between these characters.
Right.
One story in particular, I don't want to spoil it. It's kind of like a side story. Um, is just kind of beautiful to watch. The
Okay.
change of these characters and how they're interacting with how they accept each other. Why do they hate these picks or whatever they're calling
Mm-hmm,
them? And
mm-hmm.
it's just the world building to me is just fantastic. It's so cool. I love seeing strange worlds if I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
watch something
Oh, for
fantastical.
sure.
It's just
Yes,
seeing
yes.
something different is really fun, and I like 1800s vibe, the
Okay.
aesthetics.
Cool.
So
And what about games? You mentioned that a fair bit. Like it's a
yeah,
key inspiration for you, and even a release as well. Like I mentioned earlier, I could just play nonstop. I have actually done that where I've just played,
yeah,
been so tired where I realized that I'm not even enjoying this, but I'm still going to keep playing.
yeah.
Um, but like, what kind of games are like your go tos? Like, just like this is a like when you see somebody, you want to force them to play the game because you just love it so much.
There's a mix. It's quite funny. The Last of Us obviously is one. That was my favorite in 2012. I didn't know anything going in, and I came out of it being like, holy crap. That was a medium of storytelling that I've not seen before in games. But lately, I'm gonna say Animal Crossing, because
So
in
good.
my opinion, it's just this never-ending piece of art. You're always redecorating your island. You can be it's
Mhm.
self-motivational. It's just a way to express yourself, and I think that's really cool to see in a game. Like, and it's cute and cuddly, and Tom Nook's trying to screw you over, but
Yeah, of course.
whatever.
Very high prices. Very high prices.
And then oh, what I'm trying to think of any sort of like action games I've played lately. Um, Honestly, I'm gonna say Persona. I know they're not action games, but Persona games I really like.
Okay.
I love the games where there's there's connections between characters.
Uh-huh.
First, like the world is cool. If the world is beautiful, like I'm the type of person. If the game looks good, like I'm in it. But like just small things like I really appreciate just character connections and like emotion in games and feeling something when I'm playing this game as well, because I think that that lends to the experience of feeling that emotion, and how do you express it. And
Mhm.
also it's human nature, like to be curious about relationships and how people interact with each other, and how would I interact in this
Mm.
situation, and that sort of thing. It's just cool. I think games are neat in the way that they're a medium for entertainment, but also for storytelling as well, and that sort of thing. Like,
Yeah.
it's cool. It's cool to see
Games
it
are
evolve.
are a fascinating medium because clearly, like some can be very cinematic, which obviously inspires from cinema and TV.
Mhm.
Some can be very playful, which inspires games. Like
Yeah.
being played for, and it's definitely become its own. But seeing how it has developed from, I think the first games were like, were the 70s, 80s, like Pong or something like that,
Yeah.
where it was literally like just real world sports almost, like condensed into a digital format, where it's just become like very arcadey.
Mhm.
To, you mentioned Last of Us, like that is a timeless masterpiece and will always will be a timeless masterpiece. And that was one of the last games I played before I stopped gaming for that period of time.
Mhm.
And it's only until last year where I got a PlayStation again and started gaming again. So it's a big chunk of time.
Yeah.
But The Last of Us was that kind of game where it was like, whoa, like it
It
doesn't
hit
feel like a
hard.
game.
Yeah.
And it was just absolutely amazing. But even as a game as well, it's a great game.
It is.
Like,
It is. It's gameplay. I think it's
yeah.
pretty solid. Like it's the gameplay reflects the environment that you're in for sure, and I
Yes.
really appreciated that.
No, it was truly genius. And obviously the team behind it were absolute masters across the board. Like it wasn't, you could tell it was like A-list throughout. Like Lord of the Rings. Like they had the best people on there, clearly given everything. I'm sure there was a lot of tough days and not tough days.
Mhm.
But even like, so like from my point of view, I'm not really into horror stuff. I'm definitely into zombies. I'm not a fan of like zombie shows or films. I like a few of them, but otherwise I'm like, nah, I don't want to know vampires and zombies. No thanks.
Yeah.
However, these zombies, hell yes.
Yeah,
Like this isn't just like that.
this
This
isn't
is,
just a regular zombie.
yeah.
This is
And like we was
something
talking about
that's
nature.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
connected to nature, and I loved. I don't want to spoil it the show or anything
No,
for
let's
anyone who's
spoil
not
it.
watched.
People should.
Uh,
Oh, not the show, not the show.
that's the show,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
the way they started the show, with the background was haunting. It was beautifully done.
yes.
Just grounding it that way. I think it's just cool. It's a cool. I mean, for me, like I've watched zombie shows, and when I heard about The Last of Us, the game, I'm like, okay,
Uh-huh.
another zombie game. But I
Yeah,
picked it up
exactly. Yeah.
anyway, and I'm like, you know what? This is a refreshing take, and I love seeing that in games. I love seeing just like for that time, I don't know if there was a lot of those hard hitting story games out
Mhm.
there quite like that, but it's cool to kind of open a new section of what games could be.
Oh, for sure. And even like when it comes to gameplay mechanics, like every game where you got bad guys, you got hordes, you got waves or whatever, the aim is you should be able to destroy them. You should be able to get through them. It's going to be difficult, but you get through them. But I just remember enjoying the fact that in The Last of Us, the game in particular, when you see clickers, you're not going to survive. You just run. Like
Yeah, yeah,
unless the game force you to do it, and then you're thinking, "Fuck, why do I have to go through these guys? Why can't I sneak around?" And
yeah,
it's almost like that they toyed with your anxiety mechanism
yeah,
in a
for
very,
sure.
very smart way.
It was smart.
Um, and that was really cool. And even like the use of weapons, like obviously it's not new where you have to kind of like find your weapons, be scarce with your ammo and build your weapons. But even then, it was like you cherish when you had a good weapon, but then you
Yeah,
also knew that it was never going to be forever and you're going to lose it. And then, yeah, it's just
yeah. Every
very, very
every
good.
aspect of that game is just some emotional twist. You know what I mean? Whether it's the gameplay where you're cherishing that bullet that you have, and you're trying to think, when do I use this sucker, um,
Yes.
or just the cutscenes, seeing the story roll out, whether it's the work people have put into the environments and the
Hmm.
characters, and you see all this detail, uh, just how these people have lived and everything. It's great to see just the amount of dedication and detail,
Hmm.
and yeah, it worked out great.
And what did you think of the sequel?
I thought I liked it. I thought it was like, without spoiling anything, of course, but uh, I thought it was like a really interesting twist on the story of the characters.
Hmm.
How you could see some characters becoming akin to others, while others are switching back to,
Hmm.
uh, just seeing the characters that you thought you knew and the ways that they're changing. Why are they changing? Who are they reflecting now, and why are they doing this? It was crazy. It was great.
Oh, that is, yeah. Anyone who hasn't played it or even like haven't got time, just watch a
Watch
YouTube
YouTube, yeah.
playthrough. You'll be engrossed. It's just, it is fascinating. Have you played Shadow of Colossus?
No, but I've watched a lot of it. Yeah.
Okay. So that for me is one of those that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Like for me, it's one of those I always recommend someone to play it.
Yeah.
When I first played that, the way it gripped me, and that was like in PS2 graphics. I know they've like done it to PS4 level now and beyond, and
Yeah.
even The Last Guardian. Basically, for Mito Ueda, who makes those games, for me the fact that it's like a game almost like the opposite to Last of Us, where it is still a bleak place, a wide space, but bleak, but almost just one
Yeah.
character and a creature, or one character, and you project something on this inanimate object or like a creature or something. Oh man, it's just so good.
Yeah.
Um, I'd highly recommend playing it whenever you get around to it, even just running around. I got two young kids, and they're very impatient and they're very crazy at times. Yet, so when I mentioned I play Gran Turismo, when I play Gran Turismo, they just want to jump in front of the TV and get me off it because it's boring.
Yeah.
Although they eventually do with anything I play, when I put Shadow of Colossus on, they're just mesmerized by this open
Wow.
world and this horse
Yeah.
running around. And it reminds me a lot of Death Stranding, which is almost very similar,
Mhm.
where it's like a game about solitude with a lot of threat and beautiful vistas around you as well. I don't know, there's just something powerful about that gaming trope, so to speak, where it's just literally one character, almost nothing you have to kind of like regularly kill, like in Mario, for example, with the, you got the monsters you got to jump on every now and again.
Yeah.
It's just a couple of bosses, but mainly you're just running around. And I think the scores in those games are very, very powerful. They have to play
Yeah.
a big part because
Yeah.
there's a lot of empty space, so to speak. But yeah, those are the ones that I would just like had to have a placard and just say you need to play this game and protest everywhere and make people
Yeah.
watch it.
Yeah, Death Stranding was definitely a cool game. It was just so much different than what I played before. This experience, the emotions that you're feeling as you're trekking through this environment kind of on your own. And, like there's just all these threats, but it's also very peaceful because you're just going for a
Yes.
hike,
Yeah, man.
but it's a stressful hike.
Yeah. Again, it's like one of those weird blends of almost like with the BTs, like the clickers, like you
Yeah.
don't want to face them. Sometimes you have to, oh, here we go again, but it's almost like, oh, I'm happy to kind of just avoid this. And then when you play something like Mass Effect, where it's just bad guy after bad guy, you want to go crazy. And sometimes that's very cool as well. But
Mhm.
yeah, just interesting how different game mechanics really affect how you experience the game and the
Yeah.
universe and even like tell the story and stuff. And I'm sure as an artist as well, like seeing the game design in these as well and how they're designed and built and implemented is surely got to be another avenue to kind of like, or an angle to appreciate these things, right?
For sure. Yeah, definitely seeing just kind of like maybe it's the wrong analogy, but how the sausage is made or how it's all
Yes,
made.
yes.
It's very inspiring, it's intriguing. There's stuff like I would have never thought about before. Just watching all these disciplines and how they interact with each other and just seeing people do all this magical stuff that it
Mhm.
just goes right over my head, like technical art. It's wizardry to me.
Um, and in terms of like for yourself moving forward, obviously the year has well, it's definitely begun, not just begun. We're kind of like heading into the end of the first quarter very, very soon. How do you see the year progressing for yourself? What kind of goals do you have? Maybe not even just for this year, moving forward in the long term, so to speak. What is on the horizon for you?
Well, primarily it's always trying to get better. I think for me, personal projects, I definitely want to put some focus into keyframes and
Hmm.
kind of more hard surface design. Um, because I know I focus a lot on characters and creatures, but I think it is important to show a range of stuff. And unfortunately, most of the stuff I've done in those categories is NDA. So I think I'd like to focus on getting better at storytelling, at keyframes,
Hmm.
and about telling emotional stories, especially now that I'm working in film and
Hmm.
I want to get better at that, especially with the keyframe part, the storytelling, the
Yeah.
you know just what you can do with an image that affects someone else, like that just building a whole world. There's so much kind of up in my mind that I want to do, and I'm like, gotta get some time.
Yeah. And I think something you mentioned there just kind of like connected with me. Like you mentioned about just getting a lot of emotion into that still image. Obviously, films are moving images, so are games. But some of the things that really define iconic films of our forever are those stills.
Yeah.
Like, maybe just a shot of Darth Vader in any film. Screen grab anything in There Will Be Blood and other films as well. Like there's just that still image and is that kind of nailing that. Um, Also, I want to ask you, like, how do you manage kind of doing everything? Like you do everything: characters, creatures, hard surface, props, environments, keyframes. How do you not get overwhelmed with all of that? Like, how do you balance it all?
Usually, I like to balance it personal work and sometimes at work as well if they'll allow me to. Maybe I'll do a character and then now I want to do something opposite, an environment, just to keep the muscles, like just going, just
Hmm.
keep it going and stuff. But yeah, I think personal work. I think if especially a younger artist starting out, I mean, I'm saying it's important to do everything, but I think it's important to find what you're passionate about, but also experiment and try to learn other things, because I think all in all, like whether it's environments or props or characters, it's all about design, uh whether that's like composition, color theory, what have you. It just all boils down to design and how you're manipulating shapes and colors and lights to get the emotion that you want. So for me, it's kind of helpful to kind of think of it that way, as design, I guess, rather than like or maybe even thinking of a prop as a character,
Hmm.
even that helps. Like if you're a character
Yeah, for sure.
focused person, maybe this is a piece of advice. Maybe thinking of an environment or a prop like a character will help you along with the design. Um, just kind of tapping into what you know and how you can utilize those skills to kind of get better in other areas.
Hmm. And just to jump in there, you mentioned about props as a character. The ring, the One Ring in Lord of the Rings,
Yeah,
this
there you go.
literal piece of graphic design which carries so much character. Um, and even like almost every single weapon in Lord of the Rings, as well as Game of Thrones, Valerian steel is just cool.
Yeah.
Like just carries all that legend, almost like yeah, just like instilling legend and mythology into these inanimate objects, like for sure, like lightsabers, anything. Um, it's been great chatting with you today. Before we wrap up, I have a few questions.
Yeah.
Firstly, final words and thoughts from yourself, and also if you could select three things, wherever that may be, it's up to you, that listeners should or you think should check out or do or take or experience.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with that. The There were a couple courses that I took just throughout the years that kind of helped a lot with expanding my skill set. One of them was with Simon Lee. He's as kind of like a creature sculptor. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of him, like great artist. But I took a mentorship with him, and it doesn't have to be a mentorship, whatever.
Hmm.
But he just has so much insight into the ins and outs of kind of not just creating a character, but creating a character that resonates.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And Maciej Kusi, or sorry, my names are
Mache?
getting mixed up. Jama Jarabiev, is that
Oh
how
yeah,
you
yeah,
pronounce his name?
yeah,
He
yeah.
has a key concepts for movies course that
Hmm.
I also took, and that was really good to learn about kind of like introductory to cinematography, also technical things. Um, I realize it can be really difficult for some folks to have access to these sort of things because of
Hmm.
money constraints. But I also think online, like especially these days, there's a lot of resources on the internet, and I think even
Hmm.
these artists, some of them have small Patreon or Gumroad tutorials and stuff like that. I think it's finding an artist or artists that you admire and then just trying to learn from them. I think is important.
Sure.
yeah, just always seeking the opportunity to learn more, I think is important. Whether that's
Cool.
taking a course or hey, maybe you're just going to go on a holiday and observe some old ruins, you know? Like,
Oh, it's so cool.
yeah.
I've done that, and it's the best thing ever. It's the best holiday I've ever had.
I bet. And sorry, what was the first question?
I guess one was more like just final words from yourself, anything you'd like to
Okay.
share,
Yeah.
or plug.
Oh, honestly,
Yeah.
I'm super happy to be on this podcast with you, and hopefully I can inspire some younger artists. I know it can be a tough journey, but I think like if you really love drawing and you love creating, it's a really fulfilling job. Um,
Mhm.
and the important thing for me is like just it can be tough. Like sometimes you feel like you're not doing well and you're not progressing and you're stuck. And I think with that, it comes there's a support system, and this is all coming down to like mental health and stuff. But it's important to not be isolated. I think when you're drawing,
Mhm.
it's nice to have a community where you're bouncing ideas off each other, and that helps you grow as well. So I guess that's kind of maybe a final point to say is like the art community is great. People love teaching each other stuff, and I think it's important to kind of what is it keep that community going, that where everyone's trying to learn from each other and everything. That's kind of my dream anyway. uh,
Awesome.
yeah,
Well
just
said.
for everyone to be
Yeah.
inspired and like I know stuff like AI is maybe scaring some younger folks away, but I think it's important to just kind of stick with design fundamentals and just
Mhm.
just keep learning and keep pushing because I think it's a worthwhile career path.
For sure. Well, it's like something that once you kind of do it, it's with you forever. Whether
Yeah.
you um use it, turn it into a career or not, it's going to be stuck
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah, even if you
Yeah.
love just drawing on the side, like that's amazing. Like I love when I meet someone who maybe works in the mechanics and they
Hmm.
do tattoo work on the side. That's amazing. Like you're just this creativeness, and that's what I want to see more from people. It's
Yeah.
just everyone be creative.
And to use a zombie analogy, once you're infected with creativity,
Exactly.
and you're just going to turn into a creative zombie, but hopefully a cool one, not one that's going to destroy the world.
Yeah.
Hopefully make it a better place.
Just make it a
Um,
better place. Yeah.
yeah. Amy, it's great chatting with you. We should definitely do this again. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
jumping
thank
on.
you. Thank you so much.
A massive thanks to Amy for sharing her experiences, and I hope this inspires you on your own journey too. Tap on the links to give Amy a follow, and then head on over to learnsquared.com and take your art journey to the next level. If you're enjoying the podcast, please like and subscribe. I've been your host, Aaron Dander. Till next time.